Welcome to Hanover Park.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Before we get started, just wanted to give a quick shout out to our elected officials. Wanted to, when we call your name, you could just raise your hand or stand up, whatever works. To our Hanover Park, Hanover Township Supervisor Brian McGuire. And Bryce Yauer from Streamwood Park District Vice Commissioner. And then our board members, Trustee Jim Kemper. He's also on CIDC. Trustee John Kunkel. Our village clerk, Ada Corral Sepulveda. And and we have also wanted to give a shout out to Julietta Maller, who works behind the scenes, and thank you for your support and help in everything that you do, our village manager. And then to the rest of our staff, as well as Mayor Craig right here. He's going to give an introduction, Mayor of Hanover Park, and thank you so much for your support in everything, for Culture, Inclusion, and Diversity Committee.
I do want to announce that we will be Facebook Living this session, so be excited, you're on Facebook Live.
Thank goodness I have a clean shirt. So, I'd like to welcome you all this evening. I just came from the Kids at Hope Coalition meeting, and so bringing community together is what we're all about. And these marvelous ladies tonight are going to lead us through some wonderful ideas and leadership thoughts. And when they put on here the aging and the immigrant population, well, I can cover for the aging because I'm older than the hills, so you know what. So, but it's a real pleasure to have you all here tonight to come together in our wonderful community of Hanover Park. We have Police Deputy Chief here, Andy Johnson. It's nice to have you here with us, Andy. Dr. Ma is here, our principal from Ontario School. And I know there's many of you that carry us through day to day. Mr. Garcia. Jaime Garcia is here, and I call him every once in a while and say, hey, help me out here because I got a freight train coming our way and we want to make sure we jump over those hurdles. So I was given 2 minutes by Ada to speak. I was reduced that by Brian McGuire to a minute, and somebody else pitched in at 30 seconds. So everybody knows once I get the microphone, I don't know how to go off. But these two marvelous ladies have pulled together a nice event for tonight. I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting. It demonstrates the leadership of our community. So, Charlene, if you would, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we dive right into the presentations, we wanted to share a little bit about the village that you're in right now, Hanover Park. As you see here, we are a population of a little over 38,000. We're an incredibly diverse community and happy to be so, as reflected in our Global Village slogan as well as our logo. You'll see that our median age is 33, but we don't forget our aging population, so we will continue with understanding that and how we can serve them. Our residents are a little bit over 1/3 foreign-born, which is why we're going to focus on the immigrant population, better understanding them, and also better understanding how we can serve this group. So I'm going to go next into some of our annual programming. Many of you have been to all of them, or many of them, but just to give you a quick rundown. We have what you're in right now, an annual community leaders reception where we get together for presentations on different demographics. If you'd like to do more of a workshop on the topics that were presented, we also host a stakeholders meetings. We've had a few, I think 3 already, and we've had some great discussion, and Ada will go into detail about some of the action items that came out of that. Our community service project is MLK Build Up Day, where we celebrate the honor the legacy of the late Martin Luther King Jr. in his pursuit of equality and service to community, which is also our motto and our mission as Culture, Inclusion, Diversity Committee. A couple other things are the Back to School Mental Health Fair, where we do backpack donations. And then the last is the Culture Celebrations, where we support Hanover Park and regional partners and many of their programming and initiatives. Ada will go a little bit into detail on our stakeholders meetings that many of you have partook in, and we are excited to share some successes within a few short, I think 18 months, right? So with that, Ada, if you could go over it.
So this past spring, many of you attended our spring stakeholders meeting. I thank you for coming to that event, and I thank you for coming today as well. At that meeting, we talked with Sylvia Fuente from the Latino Policy Forum, and she walked us through some of the paradoxes of the Latino community. And we took a dive into some areas, health, housing, education, workforce and economic development. And we talked amongst ourselves, we split up into different groups. All of you did your homework and read before the event even started to get familiar with the topics of interest. And then during the event, we had some discussions and some goal setting. So it was very much a hands-on session, and I thank you for all the work that you did that day. But not only did you do some work that day, you also continuously followed up, and we said, Sylvia said, you guys need to hold yourselves accountable. We need a date. And we said that November was our deadline to achieve these goals. And I want to applaud you guys. And let's all applaud ourselves because we had some really great feedback to all of our committee members. Our committee members were amazing. They prepared themselves. They studied the chapters. They were ready to lead and facilitate the sessions. They did the follow-up calls and emails with everyone. These are all residents that lead our committee, and so I'm very proud of the initiatives that they have taken. And I want to go over some of the goals, some of the successes. So the goal that we saw that came up quite a few times was build relationships with the individual residents served in our community. Greater Elgin Family Care Center was one of our success stories. So one of the things that they did was to go and connect with the public at food pantries. This is an access point, a hotspot where you see a lot of residents coming through. But not only did they think, okay, we'll go when we have an event, they do it on a monthly basis. So it's become a routine. So for us, that's a success point to say, okay, we need to have a routine activity where you can have that interface with residents one-on-one. Poplar Creek Library had multiple unique events where the focus outreach, instead of a multicultural, one-size-fits-all approach, they individualized their programming to specifically target a diverse demographic. So they did Hispanic Heritage Month, they did a Diwali event, they did a Dia de los Muertos event, and so by doing that, they were really able to hone in and target key demographics within their population. Business Connect Committee held a business expo in conjunction with a family-focused event. And so they were able to maximize exposure to the business community and to the residents. So before, we had a lot of networking, but not as much exposure to residents. And so this was a great opportunity for our business owners to be able to have that one-on-one interface with our residents. And then finally, at Charlene's recommendation, I included on June in the summer, we had, with the Latino Policy Forum, myself, the Office of the Clerk's Office, had a Latino Leaders event where we specifically reached out to individual Hanover Park Latino leaders. And it was really a great event that focused on residents and agencies that service or leaders that service elected officials, and was very well attended. I was very excited. And we shared a little bit about specifically what were some of the perspectives and outlooks that we were looking for in our community. So thank you so much for the success of this past year. It's been a lot of work from our committee, so I thank them as well. And of course from you to say, okay, you know what? These are some strategies. We're going to commit to these goals and we're going to fulfill them. Some of you have continued to follow up some initiatives, and so we're excited to see where they turn out. Now we'll go into our programming. This is the aging and immigration population. A few years back, we said, you know what, we really need to understand our community better and get a sense of what these demographics mean. But we didn't want to have this big, giant program one day, and we have so much diversity in Hanover Park, so we decided to turn our leaders reception into a series so that we can delve into these demographics and really get a sense of what this means, what these numbers mean to Hanover Park specifically. So today we're focusing on the immigrant population and the aging population. We want to look at intersections in those communities. We have a very diverse population in Hanover Park, and that extends to the aging population as well. I was very pleased to learn new information. Last year we spent some time learning about Latinos and millennials, so I felt very validated myself. Yeah. But this year I learned a lot just to looking at the slides of what our aging population is like and what some of the issues that they're going through. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Marta Pereira, and her bio is in your pamphlet. I'm going to ask you please to read it. She is the Executive Director of CLEAS, Coalition of Limited English Speaking Elderly. So she will kick us off with her presentation, and we will be followed by an intermission to thank our sponsors, and then we'll continue with our second presentation. If you have questions, we do want to encourage you to ask some questions, but please keep in mind that we do want at the end to have a synergy discussion so that we can talk about holistically both presentations.
Okay,
Where are we going from?
Thank you.
There you see.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. So good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adria. Your energy is contagious. We really appreciate that. I am an immigrant myself. I was born in Poland some time ago. I was having some connections with the area because part of my family was born in this area, in Chicago, suburban area. So I had some connection. I could come and say hello out or see some cousins, which was so amazing. So I was really, I appreciate that opportunity given me by life. And but I have to tell you, it is not easy when people immigrate to the United States in older age. And this is what Coalition of Limited English Speaking Elderly is all about. This is about people who come to the United States late in life with their sort of productive lives behind them and leaving a lot behind and kind of trying to adjust to the new reality and new lives. So today I just wanted to, this is first of all, wanted to thank the mayor of Hanover Park, trustees, some friends I see in the room, familiar faces, and you guys, distinguished group of guests and participants who are able to come in the cold evening. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I really appreciate that invitation. Okay, so just very simply, I was thinking, what can I tell you about aging and immigration? There's so many aspects of this topic that it's hard to talk about everything, obviously. So I thought, since CLEAS, our coalition, is heavily involved in policy and as well as services, I wanted to give you just gist of information regarding how those, many of you might be very well familiar with that process, but maybe some of you are not, how those funding are being distributed and how the aging is being supported in our state, in areas where we live, in our communities. Obviously, it goes from the top to the bottom. And this is preferable when the bottom is, just spread as community is right now. Federal funding is regulated by acts and policies which set the way and set the goals for support for services. So we do have a couple of acts which manage federal funding, which I will just have a slide in 1 second, in one moment. I just wanted to let you know, for the past 5 years, that relationship between federal government, state government, and community kind of has changed dramatically because of the presence of the new partner, among us, which is the change of reform of Medicaid, first of all, which occurred in 2011, and then Affordable Care Act, which brought new opportunities to states and brought new partners to deal with in terms of care delivery, health care, and funding, how that mechanism is being funded. So with managed care transition and moving into the state of Illinois about 5 years ago, those managed care organizations, which are private health insurance companies, majority of them, brought new standards to care. And all of a sudden, we talk about those three aspects when we talk about services for people, care delivery. Whoever is in need of services has to start looking into those three items, three aspects, which are called triple aim. First of all, improved experience with care, improved quality of care, satisfaction with services is very important. Quality measures are important, as well as, obviously, cost efficiency. So all of those aspects, all of a sudden, play important role in care delivery. Why am I talking about it? Because when you talk about older, let's see, our expertise, police expertise, is in older adult population. We talk about multi-generational families, but we emphasize older adult and their well-being and their access to services. So and there is a growing number of older adults, period, in the society, including immigrant population. Because there is, like Hanover Park, it's a largely immigrant populated area. People join their families, they're moving in, they require some services, some attention, some access to services. So those numbers are growing. And I can say that many places, many suburban areas, many townships, villages are preparing themselves for that way. In Arlington Heights, where I live, I almost laugh sometimes with my friends because all of a sudden there's this influx of dementia care facilities and transitional care businesses, industry. And you can see how that village is changing dramatically. This is a good thing because this is a job influx and opportunities to develop new employment service, etc. But it is also changes the way village is looking like. So it's a good thing. I can't say it is not, but it's also sort of like overwhelming, at least in the past couple of years. Like everywhere you have those developments. So on the federal level, we have Older Americans Act, which basically governs service provision for older adult population. And that Older Americans Act, which was enacted in 1965, has 7 titles. We'll not go into details, but just to generally, guys, so just to let you know, when you see nutrition services, when you think about nutrition services, and you say, oh, there's this center which delivers, congregated meal site. What that means, where does funding come from? That funding will be coming from Title III of that act. That means that this money is being sifted through the state, and state is paying area agencies on aging in the local, regional way, and then area agencies on aging are contracting with providers who deliver that meal ultimately. So this is kind of interesting to see how it goes. So you have various administrative rules in Title I and II. Title III is of humongous importance to older adult population because, as we say, it talks about nutrition services, home and community-based services, which are, largely more and more well-known and popular among our members of the community, older adult members. They prevent unnecessary admissions to nursing homes and kind of lowering the cost of care for people who deserve it and who need it or who qualify for that care. Again, that funding will be coming from Title III. Then you have Title IV, which some of you, funding is received to some of you in this room. I spoke with one of you. I think it's federally qualified health clinics, FQHCs, which are, again, we were briefly discussed it, part of Affordable Care Act opportunity and provision, are being funded out of Title IV, because Title IV is talking about program innovation. So whenever, what was innovative when Affordable Care Act came? Care coordination and care transition. Everybody, and I cannot tell you how many times I was sitting in so many committees at Rush University, at Northwestern, when we were talking about transitioning a patient, a client, a member, a consumer from the hospital back to the community. How that process looks like. So that person can avoid unnecessary rehospitalization or nursing home admission. So what is the best way of surrounding that client, that patient, with services which will allow that older adult to follow medication and feeling better so they will not end up in the hospital 30, 60, or 90 days later again. So that prevention, that preventing that older person from going back to the hospital is that cost efficiency. That's where dollars are being saved. So all those care innovation, care transition grants, programs, which were mushrooming between 2012 and 2016 or 17, are being funded by Title IV. Title V is being managed by Department of Labor, so it's not on the Administration on Aging, which is called Administration Community Living. That name was changed a couple of years ago. Senior Employment Program, which is for adults 55 and older, low income. They have to meet the federal poverty level at 125%, and there is the support and help for them to be employed and to be happy and to have purpose every day, go and work and have some income. So that's how it works. Title VI are for Native American tribes, and Title VII mostly focusing on elderly rights. Just to give you just some gist of information. Now, on the state level, you have, Department on Aging, for example, and Department on Aging is charged with a responsibility of coming up with state plan on aging every 3 years. So this is a 3-year project, which basically talks about various aspects of aging services everywhere in the state. Rural Illinois versus super, urbanized Chicago, right? I cannot tell you how different that is. I mean, you all know maybe even Hanover Park. It's a quiet village, potentially, maybe, except that one main street. But I remember when the new director came a couple of years ago, Department on Aging, she said, oh my God, in this one senior building, which has like 19 floors on LaSalle Street in Chicago, I could pack all my clients, which I have in my entire county. I was laughing because she said, in rural Illinois, people live so far from each other. You drive and drive to deliver those services. You couldn't imagine how different that is. Here you have like skyscraper people living in one little huge building, and you can serve them all at the same time. So I remember that was huge for her. But state is focusing on challenges, opportunities. What resources are we dealing with? Who is out there to serve those older adults? CLEAS, our organization, sits in the advisory council of the Department on Aging, myself and a couple of my colleagues, as well as we had for 25 years, we had a grant with the Department on Aging to support minority providers, minority communities in accessing services. So that was as well our role. So a couple of priorities, so you kind of have a better understanding what that state plan on aging is. Sounds big, but really it's about seeing what should we do in order to be efficient in serving our clients. Who are those clients? How many do we have in Illinois? My good friend Rob will probably tell you much better, and all those statistics and detailed numbers. But it's probably over 2 million easily, people who are 60 plus. Are they qualified for services? Yes, there are certain rules. For example, priority 3 is talking about sustaining and expanding the network of community-based providers of services. What that really means? That means that if you have an organization, either for-profit or non-for-profit, and you want to serve seniors, you have to come to places potentially maybe like CLEAS or local area agency on aging and get yourself familiar with rules and regulations. But if you have good idea and resources, not necessarily tons of funding, but human resources, if you have staff who is able and willing to help, you might actually do the great job in order to serve your seniors in your area. So obviously, Department on Aging and all of us are seeing increases in number of clients being served, significant increases. Currently, that program, which is called Home and Community-Based Services, this program in Illinois is called Community Care Program, serves close to 100,000 people statewide. And this number is growing because more older adults is coming and more of them will be qualified for those services. There were discussions and back and forth, should that program only focus on people who are eligible for Medicaid or on everybody? We believe that everybody should qualify for that program regardless of their Medicaid eligibility. So we did a lot of advocacy in order to make that program available to the larger audience. We have important mechanisms in those priorities. We have adult protective services focus. It's important. You talk about elder abuse and neglect. You talk about maltreatment of older adults, financial exploitation. All those aspects, unfortunately, are out there and doing well, which is a very sad news. Only 20%, or probably less, is being officially reported to law enforcement. The rest is not, so you can imagine how much is going underreported. We also talk about promotion of healthy aging mechanisms and prevention of various diseases and chronic conditions. So all of those priorities are sort of focusing on those type of aspects of services. Briefly about CLEAS. We were officially incorporated in 1989 by leaders of ethnic communities in Chicago and area surrounding Chicago. That was a couple of private foundations which came together, and the city, and we did that humongous 150-question type of research project. And based on those findings, we realized, the city realized, that there were older people who don't speak English that are out there, but they didn't have access, they didn't receive services. Why was that? Because of language and cultural barriers. So when CLEAS was created, people were thinking, oh, maybe 5 years from now, people will learn English and things are going to be well, CLEAS won't be needed. But it seems that we are still needed because American society is a dynamic structure, people coming and going, families are mixing, and there is a constant movement. So people are not necessarily just sitting and being steady. There's a lot of commotion going on. So people need a structure, and providers need a structure which will support limited English-speaking older adults. CLEAS is a membership organization. We have over 50 ethnic community-based organizations. Some of them are mainstream as well, serving minority populations. So we are crafted of those organizations. Together, as a coalition, we serve over 200,000 clients a year as a whole coalition. We have large providers, small providers. We speak over 100 languages, so this is a large statewide entity. And out of those 200,000 people, about 75% are people who are 60 years and older. So this is a pretty significant chunk, over 60,000, even more. Well, actually, more than that. 60,000 rather. So it's a pretty significant number of people who are, as we might learn in a moment, who don't speak English well or don't speak English at all, especially at home and places like that. So I have that sentence here, nationally recognized. Just this year, which is such a good thing to report to you, we were so thrilled and honored. National Association of Area Agencies on Aging, which is located in Washington, D.C., they have that Aging and Disability Institute, which is funded by John Hartford Foundation. That entity was created a couple of years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago, to recognize innovative projects when it comes to healthcare. And this year, CLEAS was recognized nationally. We won that award, which was an amazing thing. We were awarded during the conference in Chicago for our work with medical health plans. So just wanted to let you know that because I brought some materials here. Those green brochures are about our work with health plans and healthcare services. And it's been recognized as an innovative project. It is indeed very innovative. It's different. We are we believe that older people deserve decent services, and most important aspect of satisfaction with services is their ability to communicate with healthcare providers. So we were creating the Language Access Center, and we work with a couple of health plans to deliver communication in various languages at home during home visits. Couple of projects, just briefly what we do really. So we, as an advocacy, we raise awareness about needs and rights and contributions of limited English-speaking older adults. We don't only talk about needs. Oh, these are those needy people. We don't like to present older adults that way. We talk about people who contribute to their families, to their communities, to their villages, their townships. And this is what's amazing about immigrant older adults. So we're linking communities together, we bring the older adults and services together. Forum like this one is one of many which we might be active and actively talk about that need of bringing services and people together. We also promote sensitivity, insight into cultural differences. We have a couple of projects which we were leading in recent years. Some of them were strange, you might think, at the beginning. One of them was there was federal funding coming from Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services on the federal level, Office of Refugee Resettlement, where we were building an urban farm for refugee populations. And that became a great project, which actually lasts until this day. Funding came in 2010, and the project is still booming, even though funding ended after 4 years. The farm is located in the city of Chicago, and I strongly, encourage you, if you're going to be there in the area of California and Lawrence, you please look at that acre and a half. We have multi-generational groups coming and recognizing the value of being together. We always said refugees know how to farm. The local community might learn from them. Refugees do not know how to navigate the system, so let's them both talk together. That was a great fusion and the project. And another one might be our work with managed care plans when we advocate on behalf of limited English-speaking populations in the state and actively participate in bringing those, breaking those language barriers. So, just to let you know, in-home services, adult day services, those are those two sort of fundamental projects, programs, which are part of that home and community-based services. For the state, currently, we probably have a little bit more than 18,000 limited English-speaking older adults served statewide in that program, mostly in northern Illinois. But there are groups and pockets of immigrants in various places in the state. I am, on the road pretty frequently, visiting various places. One interesting one is in Jacksonville, which is west of Springfield, where you have people from East Africa, from Congo, and various other countries. You might think, why are they there? It's very smart, because in order for them to be successful, they were almost immediately after being resettled in the city of Chicago and state of Illinois, they were brought to that place and offered employment. There is a big agricultural plant. They know what they're doing. They're good farmers. They understand the process. And this way they can be productive and they can earn some resources. They don't have to be necessary, recipients of benefits only in the city. City is tough for refugee populations. You might think it's paradoxical, and it's not easy. Just to, finish, just wanted to let you know that obviously older adults, when you think about seniors who don't speak English, they're not necessarily visible for the society at large. They are somewhere out there. Where are they? Well, they're usually residing with their families. They're not necessarily living alone. Some populations do, most of them don't. But they also are dependent on everything on their families: transportation, companionship, language, accessing services, health, right? So that families is extremely important. However, sometimes you might see that older adults are very isolated, socially isolated. The city, unfortunately, you can see that a lot in the city, in senior buildings especially. People live alone in little studio apartments, one bedroom or studio apartments, and they're not necessarily seeing their family that often. The family is in the suburban area, doesn't necessarily visit often. those people are very isolated, and that's where sometimes we come with our concern about their well-being. So, you know, again, other speakers will talk more about probably percentage of non-English speakers, but obviously they're mostly concentrated in the city and suburban areas, but they're spreading more and more, slowly but surely. Some populations, you know, still largest Latino population, followed by Asian, variety of Asian populations within that Asian group, and then followed by other minorities. Of course, when we talk about well-being of older adults, you talk about various factors affecting their well-being. What are those factors? You know, it really is important. It really matters if you come here, you have some prior education, or you don't. Some people, in 80s, when you look at the history of resettlement process or immigration, when we look at that, even from our police perspective, we saw immigrants and refugees, especially, well, both, actually, coming for a variety of reasons. Many of them were well educated. There were different sort of groups, different influx, different waves. Maybe some of them were coming from European countries, from other parts of the world. But within time, those groups are changing. Wherever there is a conflict, war, people trying to escape that war. And we have some countries in the world which are sort of welcoming, especially when it comes to resettlement of refugees. One of them most welcoming is United States, and there are certain numbers which are being resettled in this country for years. I believe state of Illinois, we had that grant from the Illinois Department of Human Services to support older refugees when they were coming to Illinois. There was a resettlement of about 3,000 people per year between, let's say, 2007 and 2017. That's a pretty significant number, and among them, that was at least 500 older adults who needed some help and assistance. So many of them were not educated, didn't have much education at all. So that was a different group, and from different part of the world as well. It's important when you're coming, as an immigrant, if you're younger, you're more flexible, you're able to learn English, etc. If you're an older adult, you might have some difficulty to do that, right, and retain that language. Let's remember that if people immigrate or change countries, and if they're changing countries because of refugee status, that's tough, because they're leaving their own country, going to another country, and then there's going to be the third country of resettlement. But regardless of their status, they're losing a lot. They kind of leaving a lot behind, right? Home, community, language, social contacts, familiarity, and the way how they could go around and, you know, speak in their own language. So that changes when they come here, and we have plenty of stories showing that the trauma of that process, especially when it comes to older people. But, you know, that doesn't have to be that difficult. We all are here to make sure that we are helping those groups, especially older people. So just wanted to let you know, guys, I really appreciate that opportunity to speak today and having such forum, because based on our experience, we see that at least two things don't change that much when it comes to older people. Health disparities, obviously. What are we observing? Social isolation, depression, and economic insecurity. So those three things, especially two, I should say, social isolation, economic insecurity in terms of access to resources, retention of those resources, those are the things which we have to think about when we talk about older adult population, immigrant and refugees. Thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Marta. Before we get started on the second presentation, I did want to take a few minutes to thank our sponsor, Veranda Retirement Community. Dr. Gupta, if you could stand up so you can acknowledge for all the hard work for Village of Veranda is there's a video that's going to explain what the community is, and here we go. One more.
Veranda, a unique retirement community that celebrates both American and Indian lifestyles, where community comes first, where neighbors feel like family and friends.
Our goal with Veranda was to create that special one-of-a-kind community that celebrated the best of Indian and American lifestyle.
Seniors get lonely, Veranda has thoughtfully designed facilities, amenities, and services to keep the seniors socially engaged, active, and entertained.
Loneliness is a huge problem in the senior community. Our whole concept of veranda was designed around socializing the seniors. The term veranda comes from the central courtyard of old homes where people would reconnect with their loved ones at the end of the day.
Schaumburg area location with diverse options for dining, shopping, and entertainment. Many places of worship, excellent medical centers, and easy access to downtown Chicago and O'Hare Airport. A master-planned community with townhomes and condominiums for sale, including clubhouse and medical facilities for residents. Clubhouse with vegetarian dining, full calendar of activities, gym, activity studio, library, outdoor patio, park, pond, and walkways.
From being surrounded by like-minded people who enjoy doing the same things, to the style of housing, to the extensive amenities and facilities we've planned to keep our seniors active and engaged.
An age-in-place concept for residents to get friendly and comfortable services in their own homes without having to leave the community.
Providing the medical services on-site is a huge value-added feature we offer at Veranda. It allows us to offer an increasing level of medical services to residents as their health needs change. That allows residents to stay in their own homes as long as possible without having to leave the community.
Low maintenance, stress-free lifestyle for seniors to enjoy more.
What we are offering at Veranda is not just a townhome or a condominium to live. It's a whole lifestyle, a whole community. It's about providing a support structure to our seniors which they really deserve to have in their lives.
Veranda, your home away from home.
So that is Veranda. It is at 1900 Irving Park Road, and we are very thrilled to welcome Veranda to our community in Hanover Park, not only because it will be providing services and housing for our senior community and an aging regional population throughout the state of Illinois and the country, but I think it also exemplifies how unique Hanover Park is in being an asset as a diverse community. We are not only growing within our demographics, but it is also an asset for economic development. So the immigrant community contributes to Hanover Park as it does to the state and to the national environment. We next have Rob Perro. I also welcome you to read a little bit more about him. He is the principal at Rob Perro and Associates and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And he is a demographics guru, notorious throughout Illinois. I've been following his work since I was in college. I'm a big fan. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, hi, everybody. Can you hear me if I stand like this and talk like this? You hear me well enough? Okay, good. So yeah, I'm a demographer, and my face is pressed up to the computer a lot, looking for statistics all the time. And so Hanover Park's kind of complicated. There's different things going on in this community, right? It's not monolithic, one group, one kind of characteristic. So I want to kind of help you and help myself to kind of pick some of that apart tonight a little bit, right? Understand what's going on here. And to start off with, I want to ask you some questions. Maybe we'll do this by a raise of hands, okay? I'm going to ask how many of you, and let me give you a definition first, okay? A first-generation American, okay? This is what sociologists say. Sometimes the people in the public say something different. First-generation Americans are the immigrants, okay? Sometimes people say my parents were immigrants, I was the first one born here, I'm first generation. That's second generation. First generation is the immigrant, second generation is the child of the immigrant, third generation is, you're so much smarter than I am, grandchild, fourth generation. Okay, so let's start with this. Raise your hands if you're first generation American, first generation in the United States. And we can all see that that's a pretty good portion of the population. Okay, first generation, all right. Second generation, parents were immigrants. Yeah, that's about half the population now is first or second generation, right? Okay, third generation, the grandparents. Yeah, more than a few. Are there any fourth generation? Oh, that's interesting too. Yeah. You know, fourth generation, I mean, every year goes by, it's easier to have fourth generation people because more and more people are born here. But in the Chicago area in Illinois, so many of us are just recent arrivals, even, you know what I mean, our grandparents were the immigrants. So, okay, well that tells you something about the community we're in right there. Look at that, the different percentages that are sort of just got here, you know, I say that in a nice way, and have been here for a long time. Another couple questions. So if I were just dropped out of an airplane into a random suburb of Chicago and I had to just guess something about the suburb, I would tend to guess, I'm just going to expose myself here, that except for the immigrants who came right here, okay, except for those of you who came right through the suburbs here, that especially a lot of the white people would have had family that was in Chicago at some point. Is that true? Raise your hand if you have ancestors who lived in Chicago City. Well, you know, that's interesting. It's not as high as I would have thought. You know, a lot of suburbs, forgive me for using race terms, the white people would say, you know, yeah, my grandparents were on the northwest side of Chicago or something. That's actually a little less. You are a new immigrant who dropped into Chicago. Well, that's another interesting topic too. In the old days, 10, 20 years ago, no, more than 10, 20 years ago, virtually every immigrant who came to the metropolitan area came into a Chicago neighborhood. That was the old pattern, right? That's how things were. When I talk about immigration, talk about something that people know in common, I talk about the Godfather movie. The Godfather movies, right? They come to Ellis Island, right? And they go into the Lower East Side of New York. That was the old pattern of immigration. But then what happened about 20, 30 years ago in the United States? Not just here, it happened in Los Angeles, New York. Where did the newest immigrants start to come directly to? Started to move directly to the suburbs, yeah. And around 1990, according to the census, for the first time in the history of Chicago, the majority of all immigrants were living in the suburbs, right? Big change and a break of a pattern. So you're part of that here. Your community is part of that change. Actually, a lot of the most dynamic issues around immigration and demographic change now are in suburbs like this, whereas in the old days we were talking about city neighborhoods. Okay. Just one more quick demographic question. The decade, generally speaking, that your family came here, you and or your family. Okay, so let's start with. This is kind of going to be like the generation question, but it's a little finer. Came here before the 1970s? Came in the 60s? Those are the early immigrants, folks. In the 1960s, I say the early immigrants because 1965, Senator Kennedy and a few others changed the immigration laws. We had cut immigration off dramatically after 1920. And our newest arrivals started coming in the 70s. In the 80s, family came in the 80s. A few more, all right. 90s? 90s, all right. Oh, welcome. And since 2000, your family came to the United States. One person. Welcome. All right, super. Tells us something about your community again. Different times people came here. Well, okay, I have some slides in a moment I'm going to share with you. Again, trying to disentangle your community in terms of who are the immigrants, what's their role in the community, and then who are the non-immigrants? Who are the white people, and what do they look like, and what's going on with them in your community? But before I do that, I want to just talk a little bit about how we came to have a community like Hanover Park that's so mixed, right? Between whites who aren't immigrants, and then the diverse Latino and Asian immigrant communities. So it's really important to just go over a couple things that define the white population, okay? So whites in the United States and in the Chicago area, grandparents generally were the immigrants, right? The great-grandparents. What was the Godfather generation? They came to Ellis Island, right? They got off the boat. You know that story, right? What was different about their experience? First of all, where did they come from, generally speaking? What region of the world? They were European. Monolithic in terms of the region, pretty much. I mean, there was Asian immigration. There was important Chinese immigration to the United States in the 19th century, but we're talking about monolithic immigration in terms of the region of the world. What else distinguished them? What about their religious practices? Yeah, predominantly one religious practice, right? What about the kinds of economy that they came into? Coming into the United States between 1880 and 1920, what kind of jobs did people typically move into? Blue collar, manufacturing. Now, I drove here through a lot of manufacturing centers. It's not like we don't have manufacturing anymore, right? But how was manufacturing different for the immigrants and their children of 100 years ago? What's that? It was manual labor, and what kind of opportunities, though, were there in the manual labor industrial sector of 100 years ago? No? I'm sorry? There was more opportunity. The jobs paid more, generally speaking. There was social mobility over time, right? And then the other thing about the European immigrants came with no education, very low education, and yet they were able to experience social mobility through the kinds of jobs that they were. Those are important things I want to come back to in a little bit that distinguishes that population. Also explains why the descendants of that population don't understand the new immigrants a lot of times. They don't get it. The oldest Americans, I'm one of them, my grandparents were the immigrants, people will say, how come there's illegal immigration right now? My grandparents came here legally, right? Don't we hear that? So my question is, this is important to understand things. Prior to 1900, more or less, was there such a thing as illegal immigration? No. It didn't exist. It was only after 1900 that some very slowly, they started putting in more rules and reasons which might keep you out. They first of all started to check your eyes and check your health, and then they might decide you were mentally ill. They might say you were a prostitute. They were reasons slowly put in to keep people out. But basically, there was no such thing as illegal immigration. Makes it hard for the descendants of that population to understand today, right? Which brings me to the new immigrants, all right? We just did a little thumbnail sketch of the older immigrants, right? Which built this town, right? And their descendants, and built these suburbs to a great extent, right? We owe that recognition to the infrastructure created by that generation, okay? What are some of the different things about the newest immigration? It's very complicated to explain immigration today to the average person who's not an immigrant. First of all, remember we said the older white population came from one region called Europe. Very easy, right? Where do modern immigrants come from now in the United States? All over the place. Asia and Latin America, for example, in this community being most of the immigrant population. So it's extremely diverse.
I think you forgot Africa with Europe.
Agreed. Yeah, well, in talking about the previous Americans, whole conversations about the African American population, which doesn't fit into the story of immigrants, doesn't fit into the story of opportunity, and has never been reconciled with this country, right, by our policies, right? Fair to say, needs to be talked about. The modern immigration, though, incredibly diverse from where it comes from, right? Now, unlike, again, the average immigrant from Europe who went into a factory job, what's the economy like, and what are the jobs here that the newest immigrants come into? Perfect. I heard technology, and in general, technology jobs are some of the highest paid jobs, right, in general. And I heard service, which in general are the lowest paid jobs. So it bears talking about that the newest immigrants come into an economy that looks like this. It's just split in half. It is an economy for relatively highly educated people, and it's an economy for relatively low educated people. And the reason, by the way, is not the immigrants. It's not the immigrants, it's the economy. The Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington publishes every year these statistics on the jobs being created in the United States. And they break it down by skill. And the graph and the table that they create, it's this. Or, I don't know, I can't draw it right now. It's very extreme ends. In fact, the majority of jobs being created in the United States don't require any formal education at all. It requires only short-term on-the-job training. That's the major job category being created. And then after that, the next category of jobs being created in terms of skills in the United States requires post-baccalaureate education. Right? So that's the economy that the immigrants are coming into, and that explains the diversity of immigrants. That explains why we have folks coming here who maybe came to go to college, specifically. Maybe came with a college degree, right? Maybe came with a medical degree and came here to go to do their final, help me with that, what do you call it? The residence, right? Very common. And then on the other hand, you have people, folks who come here to take the lowest paying jobs that we're familiar with. So that's how we get to a place like Hanover Park that has such differences in population. Oh, the one other thing that you have to talk about in terms of modern immigration, which explains, and it's important for us to educate our white population about, and for us to recognize, which is that the different legal statuses that immigrants fall into today. If you drew a pie chart of the foreign-born population, roughly a third of the population is a citizen, a U.S. citizen, came as a legal immigrant, has been able to naturalize. Roughly another third is a legal permanent resident, came through the sort of traditional channel, although it's complicated as to how people really come here. It used to be easy to say people get sponsored by relatives. It used to be more common, it still is, but Congress keeps adding new categories of people, but legal. And then about a third of immigrants in the United States could not get a visa. There was no visa available to them. So they're undocumented. And that job creation that I was trying to draw with my arms for you, that explains the undocumented immigration. Because we don't offer visas for low-skilled workers. Try to find them. Go on the Department of Justice website, they don't exist hardly. So there's a lot of jobs created for folks who can't get a visa to take that job. And that explains the different kinds of immigration statuses we have in our communities, right? And there's so much to say about what that means for a municipality like this. So having said that, moving on now to some of my slides, you've got a community that reflects this. And I wanted to try to talk about how this works with the effect of aging, all right? Let's see if I do this right. So I've got a Hanover Park slide here. And, well, before you look at the pies, don't look at the pies now. This is the year 2000, and this is the year 2012-2016, related period. The first thing that's interesting about Hanover Park, by the way, your population's been stable. We could go to all kinds of places in Illinois. I could take you to one suburb after another, downstate, upstate, city neighborhood, and the population decline like that. So that strikes me as very interesting about your community. You are stable in terms of population, which has a lot of economic implications, right? Your demand for housing, your ability to support shops and things is relatively stable, right? Unlike a place that's kind of bleeding population or just really losing a population. So that's significant. Okay, and then within that, though, look at the big change. Those from 12 o'clock high to about, what is this, 7 o'clock? These are folks under age 34, right? It was a majority of the population, wasn't it? Below age 35. You go over here, well, then it's slipped down to about half the population. So you see how the younger sector of the population is declining, right? And I can't jump high enough to touch it, but you see the people over 65 were just 4% of the population. And now they're at 10%. That's significant, right? Which is, oh, you got a pointer. Thank you. I'm jumping. Oh, look at that. So you go from 4% seniors, technically seniors, 65 or older, to 10. And then you look at a bigger slice, 55 and older, and up to senior that was 10%. 20%. 20% get long in the tooth. Right? So that's the profile you're moving into. And I want to try to talk a little bit about, well, who are the people in these different segments? Right? And actually, one more slide on what we've just been talking about, which is, again, change over time. Who's growing, who's declining? Children are, they grew by 83% since the last, you know what, wait a minute, that's the right way to describe that. Oh, I think I'm not going to describe this well. The point of this slide is that the oldest populations have the positive growth in your community. And these younger populations are sliding down. I did this slide badly, but the point is that it is those older folks who are really growing. Just a few more slides on this, and we'll talk about one other thing that I want to ask you some questions about. So here's something that's both a little complicated and interesting about Hanover Park, which is that, all right, here's your youngest population, children, right? And here's the percentage that are not white, right? And here's the percentage that are white. So of your school-age population, and those of you in education in one form or another know this, right? You want to see the future? There's an interesting thing. You can see the future in a couple ways in the United States. One is you can look at demographic statistics on children. The other way is you walk into a school and you see the future. American children do not look like the average American population that we see on television. They are brown, right? And this is your community that we're talking about. What happens to 0 to 17 10 years from now? They become 10 to 27. That's your future young adult population. Your current young adult population, overwhelmingly majority non-white. Maybe you know this. I mean, you live here, and most of you are not whites yourself, right? But it bears out pointing these things out. The other major thing that's important is that the white share of the population does rise as you get among the older groups, right? All right. A couple things about that. What are some of the implications for a town or a community when the older population is white or is of a certain group? What is there about older folks? Huh? What is there about older folks? How about in terms of what's that? Who might be resistant to changes, right? That's something about being older. How about in terms of civic participation? They vote, right? They vote. So there's a huge difference in terms of what the heavy voting population looks like, and the young people. It is hard to drag them out to the polls, right? They ain't voting, right? So we got this issue: is what does it mean when a community, most of the voters of a community, and this is not just here, it's everywhere, don't really reflect evenly the community. It's not their fault; they're voting, right?
Possible fixed income as well.
Yeah, well, there's other things about that population too. These are fixed income voters. And absolutely right. If they're lucky, they have a pension. Less and less people have a pension these days. Older population maybe has some more assets. Maybe owns their home. Maybe you have to see how well your community is doing in home ownership of the younger folks. That would be an interesting thing to look into. So your municipalities, like the folks who sit at these chairs, deal with these issues, right? How do I reconcile what the community looks like compared to who's putting me in office or not, right? We're familiar with that. And then the other thing about this that's interesting for Hanover Park, though, is that I was surprised about this. Again, if I went into any other suburb or most other places, I would have said that the white percent of seniors would be higher than it is here. Whites are a majority of your seniors, but they're not that much of a majority. So the veranda community knows what they're doing. Someone did their market research. A lot of the seniors are Asians and Latinos here. That's not so common. That's not so common because immigrants have traditionally been so young, right? But there's somebody who wrote a book called Peter Pan and Latinos, where he wrote an article. People tend to think Latinos are like Peter Pan that never gets old. People think Latinos are always these young folks who just got here, or they're workers, etc. But you know what? Immigrants have a right to age. Right? Like anybody else, immigrants have a right to get old. And guess what? They are. Our new immigration period in the United States which dates in 1965. That was the key year when they changed their laws. Well, 65, 35 plus 18, 44, 55, 53 years ago, people started coming in. And they came in their 20s. So again, the immigrants themselves are an aging population, and you see that here in your community. So, so you've got an aging population, much of the aging consisting of immigrants, which is a little different than a lot of other communities where the aged population would be like. Okay. Just a couple more slides here. Thanks for your energy level. Tuesday night. So the white population, which is aging, as we've talked about, it's also numerically falling. Right? And this is a little bit more of the things we've talked about. You can see where your growth is coming from. So if you want to see the future in Hanover Park, you can see what your future looks like. It's growth of Latinos and Asians, and your African American population is also growing. This is a darned interesting community because I could also parachute into a lot of places that have very few blacks. It's very easy to do that in our society and in our state. But that's not what your numbers are. This is, you got something going here in Hanover Park. You kind of look, you kind of look like a Southern California community. In all seriousness, you look like a Monterey Park or one of those Los Angeles suburbs that, well, they look like this. There's a lot more of them in the LA area, but that's, so you have a mini LA. Think about it that way? It's time to get the plastic palm trees around the police department.
Better air.
And better air. Better air. Colder, better air. Better air. Much better. And okay, my last slide before then I move into the last thing I want to talk to you about is just a little bit more about your diversity. I just pulled together who are your leading immigrants. And I like slides like this. This is true of Illinois. This is something that distinguishes us. If I was in Arizona, I wouldn't have this slide. If I were in Florida, I wouldn't be able to do this slide. I could do this in New York, New Jersey. I almost couldn't do this in California. Here's what I mean. Of the major groups who live here, it's Latin America, it's Asia again, and Europe. I mean, it's the three different continents. So your diversity is great among your immigrant groups here. And also the fact that Mexico is such a big number, that's Illinois. That's typical. Mexicans have been our largest population. Some other day we'll talk about immigration statuses and talk about the fact that because of the things we highlighted here, the lack of visas for low-skilled jobs, the percent of this population that is unauthorized is quite high. It is the reality of Mexican immigration in the United States, across communities. We need to recognize and deal with it. Children with parents who are unauthorized, deciding, making a lot of very difficult decisions. Bosnia, and you've got refugees here, which is represented by Bosnia here. Most of these folks probably came in as a refugee.
Rob, can I just clarify something?
Please.
So 33% immigrant means that 33% of our residents were foreign born.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And one of your slides had 34%, I saw, or something like that. So I had a different time period. But yeah, you're a third foreign born, which is pretty significant. Not that many places can say that. There's no state in the United States that's 33% foreign born. No. You get down only when you get down to the level of cities and suburbs, you can find something like that. All right. I think I just have one more thing to talk about, everybody. And I'm going to ask you to help me with this again, right? So, if we have, generally speaking, an aging white population, and we have a very diverse immigrant population, how do we talk about how they need each other? How do we explain to the community and get people to work together to see that they have combined interests? What are some of the interests that they have, even though they might look like very different populations?
Healthcare.
I'm sorry?
Healthcare. Okay.
Everybody needs healthcare. We do a poor job in our country providing healthcare. That certainly cuts across groups. That's right.
Career opportunities, jobs.
You know, the jobs, I agree. Everybody cares about jobs. Jobs might be less important to an aging population who probably has had a career or something like that.
Government benefits and
What would you say to me if I were to say to you, I'm getting older, I'm done, I'm out of here, and I don't want to, I don't care. I don't care what happens to this newer generation, and maybe I would say, I don't want to pay taxes. Why should I pay taxes? What would you say to me as the reason why is it in my interest to do that?
To keep your village or community safe. And
How would I keep my community safe by paying my taxes, even though those taxes might seem to go towards a group
job
of
opportunities, the lifestyle that you live, the level of, of course, that you attract your community, because of the taxes it takes.
Yeah, good schools and better property values.
Would I keep my property values up by having the community continue to be a place for children that children would want to be in? Right. How do we develop that kind of narrative so that both sides see how they need each other? Right. If I'm a senior, I want someone to buy my house who want to live here. I also don't want to see what I built sort of fall apart. Right.
Well, nobody doesn't tax.
Who's going to keep it up? Who's going to maintain the legacy I started? Right?
Illinois does not tax on retirement income, where other states do, which that's heard talked about all the time.
So there are issues like that. Might I support even more? So, and what about the flip side of that? Why should the new Americans, the newest Americans, care about the oldest Americans? What are some narratives around that?
They see their future in them.
What's that?
They see their future in them.
You see the future, yeah. And what did you say?
We need to care for each other as a community.
Because what kind of community do you want to turn into, right? Right? Any other?
Especially with people are living longer, and they're going to need more help, especially as live longer. The benefits, if they have a pension, they're fortunate. If they don't, they save enough money to take care of them.
The older population needs help, and the older population, which might have assets, spends its money. And what does that do? When it spends its money, creates jobs, right? Creates jobs and creates a dynamic area. So that's the kind of thing that I think every community would do better to kind of build out the narrative, so that we all understand why this is a good situation we're in, right? And you're sort of more crystally clear in that situation than most places are. Okay. There was a book that talked about this issue of the aging lights and the arriving, and the image it had on it was this. Why does one arm need the other? And we need to develop that. So anyway, that's where I wanted to wrap up. I didn't thank Shameen. I didn't thank Ada. Sorry. I didn't thank the mayor for making this possible.
Well, you're on my list.
You have a terrific community, and doing something like this, and look at the turnout. Congratulations. I appreciate you doing it. Thank you.
So what was, I want to get a sense of, and you do have your sheets in front of you, the evaluations, and you'll see one of the first questions. What is one takeaway that will help with your organization planning? And if you could have a little bit of discussion amongst yourselves and your table on the presentations and what you learned from both Martha and Rob. Share some of those discussions, and then at the end, we'll take a few minutes. We're running really on great time. Thank you, Martha and Rob. We usually have a little cushion, so we're running on really good time to have some discussions within our table. So let's take about 5 minutes to have those discussions. If we need a little bit more, that's okay, but I think we've got a good 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll spend the next 5 minutes sharing some dialogue with at large. Okay? Okay, let's start wrapping that up. Final sentence. Okay. So Charmaine and I are going to take a mic from table to table and hold it tight and close to you and speak into it clearly so that we can hear you, okay? We are going to start on Charmaine's side. So the lead speaker will note the takeaways of the group. And just take about, like 30 seconds, maybe a minute.
All right, my name is Gail Tobin. I'm with the library here in Hanover Park, the Schaumburg Township District Libraries branch. And at our table, we talked about how the aging population is going to affect a lot of the infrastructure. We're going to have specialized communities with special amenities, stair heights and different things like that. Traffic signals are going to have to be altered to accommodate the aging population and make it easier for them. And I know I'm forgetting something, but a lot of the facilities and the infrastructure is going to need to be adapted for the population.
Public Works Directors all over the place.
Yeah.
Let's go to this table now.
Good job.
I just wanted to say, guys, thank you so much for that opportunity again to present. This was just a beginning. We can, if anybody would like to learn more, there's so much more to offer and talk in detail about particular services available. And if any of you are interested in developing or growing your services to older adults, I will be very happy to assist and help as well.
So I think that was a big takeaway to learn that there are resources out there to assist with our aging population, get a sense of the state plan, and also know that it's difficult to reach out to diverse communities. That police is here providing those services. So thank you so
And
much.
I discovered on page 16 and 17 of the state plan on aging, police is mentioned a couple of times. I'm like, well, I don't have a choice now. I have to be part of
That
it.
was a good report. I enjoyed reading it. Let's go to
Now the aging population is growing up, so most of them may not be driving. So maybe Hanover Park Township can provide transportation, like daily ride or a street bus, so that they can go to shopping or hospital, things like that. Maybe that's the best way to accommodate that.
I'm coming from an educational perspective, so as an educator, we could probably use seniors to come and mentor and volunteer at our schools. I think children need to see that the seniors are still very active in their community. That's what kind of we got from that.
We got into the intergenerational concept a lot too. We started off by talking about, do we have a catalog of services that are out there? Do we know what the social service who's providing social services in our community? And because it's very different if you're on the west side of town than the east side of town with the 4 different townships that we have. And then we started talking about programming to combat isolation and things that could be done to integrate quarters of the community. Maybe running cultural affairs programs like the libraries do, running them through the libraries, where you bring people in for just healthy discussion and dialogue on things that are going on in the world. They have an established program like book clubs. We talked about even bingo and bunko as a way to just get people together to have fun.
I want to start saying thank you to Martha and Rob. Excellent presentations. The first one, what Martha said about home care services, my parents do use it. During the day when I work, they have home care service. And in the evening, I want to stress that as a community, we need to support not just our parents, but our neighborhood, so that we can care for each other. Community service is really essential, because we are interdependent on everybody, whether you come from different ethnicity, different age group, whichever. On our table, we had a couple people who said when they are having difficult time to get skilled workers, so they need to open visas for skilled labor jobs. Because once they are getting trained, they are leaving because they don't have healthcare insurance. Another thing is healthcare, open visas, and insurance is the main topics. Anything else? Thank you.
Yeah, looks good. It's on streaming on the internet.
We really had kind of a couple of discussions going on this table, not necessarily a table discussion, but a couple of the things that we talked on this end over here was as far as services provided. You know, here I'm part of Central Información providing services to the Hispanic community, and now the Asian community is a growing community as well. But one of the things that at Central, for example, we do not have specific programs for older adults. All of our programs, older adults come to us for the programs that we do provide, but we need to think a little bit more about, are there programs for older adults that are needed? And therefore then try to see about getting funding to be able to provide these programs.
Who wants to represent the other side of the conversation?
So we also talked about how since the youth in Hanover Park are such a diverse community, connecting them to the seniors and showing the youth those leadership opportunities that they can learn from the seniors, because soon that, you know, the minority is going to become a majority in the neighborhood. So teaching them those leadership opportunities early, as well as other organizations. So I'm from Two-Page Habitat for Humanity, making sure that our information is translated into other languages or open to reaching out to other cultural organizations so that we can share that with other cultures and not, because it's hard if you're, depending on what your staff looks like, if it's not diverse, then so.
Jill, we talked about habitat.
So first of all, in Hanover Park, we have quite a few organizations and businesses that are now gearing towards services for seniors. In addition to the retirement community, senior housing community that you saw about, there's also a group called AARA, which is the American Association for Retired Asians, that holds luncheons every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at a restaurant, and that gives a lot of opportunities for seniors to socialize, which I think is a fantastic benefit to the seniors in the community. We also had a presentation just today at our Connect Committee. A business in Hanover Park goes out and provides in-home services. It's called Care for Soul. It's located on Army Trail Road. So just information. In talking about what our group, our table here identified, and most of us love, but one suggestion here was, how do we involve students within the schools in this discussion about senior housing and immigration? Also looking for more information about helping out the undocumented immigrants. The third was, are there any strategies that can be identified by different organizations to see what are they doing to help serve the immigrant and senior population? What's the outreach and engagement? What are successful programs so that the other organizations could learn from them? And
we spoke about how a new immigrant would feel when they come to America. So we had my father-in-law who just moved here from Riyadh a few months ago, and then we were speaking about how your mother feels, how they, they're still in Mexico but not, and how do you bring that here. We also spoke about at this table how to bring people of all races and religions to bring in to a group like this. Such forums are great for bringing that inclusivity and opening up your mindsets, because not necessarily all these people will not be in the same room if it wasn't for today. So that's what we spoke about, and I thought it was a kind of opening of your minds up and accepting new things that come in each of our cultures and our communities.
Well, at our table, we talked about this senior, aging population. I'm speaking from the Schaumburg Library, and we do have a strong outreach, team that goes to visit our seniors. But obviously, there's more that we could do to bring more information to the seniors and more services that they need, especially to deal with the issues of isolation. As I have parents who are seniors, and I see that there's a need for more socialization. And I personally was surprised by the interdependence, between the aging population and the immigrant population. So that was really, actually very eye-opening for me. So I really appreciate the talks that both of you gave tonight, because we do need both populations to work together to keep our not to work together, but to understand each other and to keep our communities strong.
I think we have the last speaker.
Hello, I'm Tasneem Mathis. I'm with American Association of Retired Agents. And I just want to thank everyone for bringing us together, Martha, Ida, Julie, and everyone else in the team. Thank you so much. We need these kind of discussions, because this kind of shows us that we do have issues and we have help, but we don't know how to connect those dots. And our seniors, all seniors, I mean, I don't mean just immigrant, all seniors want to learn this. And libraries can really do a lot of it, maybe a potluck dinner now and then. So the community can come bring something and just be a part of it. And or international movie night or something like that. So that would be a great. And we do have lunches like you mentioned, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at Faizan. And it's, even though it says Asian, but we do bring food is international. Everybody ate that food, right? So that's from that restaurant as well. So come and enjoy the food. We're there from 12 to 3. And this opens up that when we sit together, when we're talking about that, what biggest impact it makes is when we can have dialogue, when we can talk to each other face to face. And otherwise, it's always not this Muslim, but the other one, Paris. But this is how you open the minds and open the hesitations, or what goes on there, or what do they talk about. We're all the same. So thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. We appreciate it. We appreciate it. I think we had a lot of takeaways of learning a little bit more about the structure of how to care for our aging population as a state, as a community, from Martha, and we also learned a lot more than I expected from Rob on the immigration lessons and history, and as well as the demographic change. I think for me, this was a very eye-opening presentation, especially since the last presentation was on millennials. But as we were listening to this, I might be a millennial, but my parents are aging, and so that's important for me to start considering. How do I help them navigate our healthcare system? How do I help them navigate resources as they start aging? Because I'm grown up and I'm not at home, and my parents are now, both their kids are graduating from college and doing well, and now they have to look at their lives with a different perspective. So I think for me, I learned those dynamics. But also, I think it's important for us to value our aging population, whether they decided to move here to Hanover Park when we just celebrated our 60th anniversary, And we did have several residents that said, you know, I've been here since 1958, or I've been here since 1970. And so we have a lot of these long-term residents that have decided to stay here in Hanover Park, rooted. And we have a lot of these residents that have chosen to stay here in Hanover Park, rooted, and they came in the 90s. Such as my parents. I was sharing with my group, in Spanish there's a song, Mexico lindo y querido. Maybe some of you guys have heard it, or I'm a little off tune. I'll blame the cold, right? But I think there was a time when my parents thought that they would go back. But at this point, they're rooted in this country, much like many of our parents and our uncles. And this is where they're choosing to live. And this is where they want to age and continue to live their lives. And it's to us, the leaders, to help them fulfill a fruitful life. And not just even to help them, but to provide those resources, because they pay taxes, as Rob indicated. And they want to see the return of investment of their taxes, as my father very often reminds me. So it is very important for us to learn more on the aging population and our demographics. I do want to also take time to thank our committee members. If you could please stand. And we do have our staff liaison. I'm going to ask both Dawn and Barry to stand. Our interim HR director and Dawn is our HR specialist. They've been really great. We are currently searching for an HR director, so if you know anybody, plug them in. But they've been working in the interim, and we had our previous HR director head out and move to Minnesota. So thank you so much. I know this was all very new, and Dawn was like, oh, I just want to make sure I get it right. So she had her checklist, and you guys were awesome. So I thank you for your support. Thank you, Juliana, to your staff and our public works staff, and the rest of your staff for helping us set up. I know this was a very busy room today. You guys, there were like 4 meetings in this room today. So thank you so much, TJ, for your staff. They were really flexible and considerate of our needs. And I finally want to thank our sponsors and our stakeholders. Thank you so much for being here, for investing your time with us, and for the work that you're doing in the future. So we'll see you in spring, if not sooner, for our stakeholders meetings to see what we cook up at CIDC. Thank you so much.